Good evening. Welcome to the Design Review Board meeting of May 9th, 2024. The DRB meeting is now called to order. Please refrain from speaking amongst yourselves during the meeting, and please turn off your phone or put it on vibrate at this time. The DRB meeting is being broadcast live on GTV, reviewable on Spectrum Cable, Channel 6, and AT&T UVerse, Channel 99. Meetings are also streamed in high definition on City's webpage, glendaleca.gov/live, on youtube.com/myglendale, and on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire devices using a free app called ScreenWeave and choosing Glendale TV from the menu. Meetings are also archived on the city's website for viewing at any time at glendaleca.gov/agendas. For public comments and questions during the meeting, please call 818-937-8100. City staff will be submitting questions and comments in real time to the appropriate person. Current DRB agendas and staff reports are available by visiting the city's website at www.glendaleca.gov. Record of decisions for all projects will be posted online on the Planning Division's website. Please note that any appeal of a case heard today must be filed within 15 calendar days of the DRB's decision. Meetings are also archived. The appeal application is available online. Now for roll call. Board Member Koskanian.
Here.
Daniel, Chair Lockeruff is absent. Board Member Simonian.
Present.
Board Member Chikayan.
Present.
And Board Member Welsh.
Present.
Okay, being that the chair is absent for tonight's meeting, can we have a nomination for a chair pro tem for this meeting?
I nominate Mr. Kasayan as our chair pro temp.
Well, I'm going to be heading out a little bit earlier today, so I don't think it'd be good.
I'll nominate Board Member Welsh.
I second.
Great, congratulations. Pro tem Chair Welsh. Okay. Reports regarding the posting of the agenda. The agenda for the meeting for today's meeting on May 9th, 2024. Regarding the Design Review Board was posted on the city's website on May 2nd and on the bulletin board outside City Hall on May 6th, 2024. Being that not all board members are here this evening, I believe we're going to be approving the minutes of last meeting to the next scheduled meeting of later on this month. Moving on to oral communications. The discussions is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker will be limited to 5 minutes. Design Review Board may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. I don't believe we have any speaker cards filled out that would like to speak for oral communications. Is that correct, Mr. Chair Pro Tem?
Correct.
Okay, so since then we do not have anybody present to speak for oral communications, we're going to move on to board or commission member comments. Is there any board member comments this evening?
No.
No.
Okay. Being that there's no old business, we're going to move to new business this evening. We have 2 items on the agenda this evening. The first one is going to be at 1329 Thompson Avenue, DRB case 001-293-2023, and I'm going to turn this over to Chloe Kuffel, who's going to provide the board a brief presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, board members and members of the public. My name is Chloe Kuffel, and I'm the case planner for the project at 1329 Thompson. The subject site is in 2 neighborhoods, kind of straddling the Grandview and El Meridero neighborhoods of West Glendale. The site is north of West Kenneth Road, south of Bel Air Drive, and between Raymond and Irving Avenues. The neighborhood consists of single-family homes, but it is worth mentioning that there are several other projects on Thompson, and I know the board just saw one recently. The existing project site is a 7,849 square foot interior lot that was originally developed in 1931 with a one-story single-family residence and a detached garage. The lot features a gentle slope and is regularly shaped, and staff reviewed the existing house and found that it was not eligible as a historic resource under CEQA. Okay, the applicant is proposing a new two-story, 2,348 square foot single-family dwelling with an underground basement, a detached two-car garage that will be accessible from the alley, and a new detached 675 square foot accessory dwelling unit. The house is designed in a Spanish Mediterranean style, and the ADU and the garage are accessed via the alley at the rear. Taking a look at the first floor plan, features a dining room and living room, both facing the street, along with a kitchen and a bedroom and a bathroom. There's also a 432 square foot outdoor patio with kitchen features at the rear of the house. And then on the upstairs floor plan, there are 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a laundry room. There's also a 247 square foot open balcony off bedroom number 2 that's addressed in the conditions of approval. Staff believes we can reduce the size of this balcony to help with reducing the overall mass of the project. All 4 elevations are shown on this slide. The design and detailing are consistent with Spanish and Mediterranean architectural styles. They have a low-pitched clay tile roof, rounded windows, and wood corbels. The project, including the ADU and the garage, feature white-colored smooth stucco and a red clay tile roof in keeping with the architectural style. The overall massing of the primary house could be reduced. We believe that by pushing in the second story on the sides and at the rear, we could reduce the massing. While the second story is appropriately pushed back from the front, you can kind of see on the facades here, it's sort of massive from the sides. The mass and scale could also be improved by redesigning the front facade to reduce the amount of dominant architectural features. The front currently has a curved window, an entryway gable, and a rounded window that sort of overwhelm the focal points, and staff has included a recommendation to address this. I've included a section drawing showing 10-foot floor-to-ceiling height on the first floor, 9-foot on the second floor, and 5 foot 10 inches on the basement level. So as a reminder, anything under 6 feet doesn't count towards floor area, so the basement does not count. And then looking at the renderings, the applicant is proposing recessed casement windows using fiberglass material, and these will also be proposed on the ADU. And I've also included the garage elevations, again using the same stucco material and roofing material as the primary dwelling, and then same thing with the ADU. Staff is recommending approval with a few conditions. One would be to reduce the amount of focal points at the front facade to improve the massing and the scale. The window with the rounded top on the eastern side of the front-facing facade should be centered below the gable, which it looks like it is now, but in a previous version it was not. And number 2, push the second story in at the sides and reduce the overall size of the second story bedroom balcony to create a more appropriately scaled project for the neighborhood. And 3, to submit cut sheets of the corbels and any architectural pendants for staff review and approval. I did not receive any public comments, and that concludes my presentation.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Kuffel. Okay, any questions for staff? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regards to the basement, what's the mindset behind it or with it? How did it come about?
It's always been a part of their proposal, and my understanding was just for storage, added storage.
Is it part of the existing conditions, or this is new? Does the house basically now have a basement?
I don't know that the house now has a basement. I don't
Okay,
believe
I'll-
it does.
we'll ask
I
the
don't think it
applicant.
does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, so we will open the public hearing. First up is the applicant, Arthur Israelian. Please state your name for the record.
Arthur Israelian. Good evening. Yeah. Arthur Israelian, this is our company project. It's when I took this job, I took more responsibility for the project because I'm living in that area, 2 minutes walking. Every day I'm walking over there. The neighbors knows me, and I believe I cannot fail with this project. Yeah. We'll try to achieve for this with design to complete the needs of my client. They like the Spanish style. They ask for the design for the Spanish style. And in our neighborhood, there are a lot of Spanish houses in El Miradero. On the next street, there's a couple of nice houses and everything. I'm walking every morning on that area. I'm checking the stuff, whatever we have in the city. The project is, I believe, is became a little nice. There's some comments from the staff. We can work a little bit more, but overall, I believe we achieve whatever my client asks and whatever we have a goal. For the reducing the size of the second floor, pushing the back on the sides, so we can work a little bit more, but it's the overall the layout of the house and the bedrooms on the second floor is going to be a little bit narrow and smaller. I think the size of the bedroom right now, the needs of the people right now, it's a little bit bigger than whatever it was in 1930, 1945. It's decent size of the bedroom, I believe. Maybe we consider a little bit more to go in, but I believe it doesn't gonna help a lot if we go in a little bit from the sides on the second floor.
Do you have any reaction to staff's comment regarding the monumentality of the facade and
Actually, we
simplifying
had
that
a couple
perhaps?
of meetings with the staff. We tried a couple of things, we changed, but again, we came back to our original project, the design. We changed, we tried to take consideration whatever they suggest for the design board from the design studio of the city. But again, we came back to our original design.
And the question about the basement condition, is the basement an existing condition on the site,
they-
or you're proposing to build a new
It's a new
subterranean basement?
basement.
Okay. Other questions from?
Basement, it's helped a lot for whoever likes the yard or whatever, they keep some stuff. It's not 6 feet, it's not
Okay, it's just unusual in California, so.
So it
honestly,
is new?
It is new.
basement is new. The house is new, basement is new.
Other questions from board members?
Honestly, in other, yeah, there is a lot of project I did with the basements in other cities and in Glendale. I did a couple in the Burbank, but a lot in LA City.
Mm.
It's not unusual now, it's in LA.
I have another question, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair.
go ahead, please.
In regards to the fireplace on the west side, well, the fireplace
In a living room or in a patio area?
adjacent to, well, the patio space next to the kitchen, is the edge of that fireplace and the edge of the kitchen at the setback line? Correct, yes. So I guess, looking at your site plan on the bottom half where the fireplace is that at the setback?
Yeah, it's within setback,
Looks like it.
6 feet.
So it's a 6-foot setback and the edge of the fireplace, et cetera, is at 6 feet. Okay. And, Mr. Chair, did you consider going a little deeper with your basement so you're not kind of popping out of the ground with the base of the building? So still having your basement, having it completely underground, but not cause the building to pop up beyond the grade? Or what were some difficulties associated with that?
It's, the lot is little bit, they have a slope on that side. It's from the north to, from the top to bottom. Yeah, they might be little bit apart from the the finished grade, but not much. Actually, it's going to be more than 75% under the ground. It's
Those are all my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? No? Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next speaker is Philip Keller.
Just to be clear, 3 minutes, correct? Thank you very much.
That's correct.
Hello and good evening, Chairman, board members, and city staff. My name is Philip Keller. I'm a board member of the Northwest Glendale Homeowners Association, and I serve as its DRB rep. I'm here today to speak about a few of our concerns with this proposed project. Forgive me, I got to speak fast to get it all in here. Our first concern with this proposal is its two-story design. We feel that this two-story house is not fully compatible with the prevailing character of the neighborhood. Specifically, its vertical massing would be in stark contrast to the lower height one-story designs of the existing homes on this block. There are no other two-story homes within the survey area, and even if you consider the entire 1300 block of Thompson, which contains 30 homes, there's only one other two-story home located at 1348. And when you drive that street, you can tell that house is clearly out of scale and it should never have been approved in the first place. In other words, 97% of the homes that exist on this street exist compatibly with the streetscape of the other homes in relation to themselves. Therefore, we propose the applicant should explore a one-story design layout alternative where the massing and square footage could be easily redistributed over this generously deep lot and still have room for a desired detached garage and ADU. Our second concern is the size of the proposal at 2348 square feet, which in itself is not a massive number. But the reason I bring that number up is it's 41% larger than the neighborhood average. But the real issue for me with it is this just further reinforces the need that if they're going to get that square footage, they should explore the one-story option to reduce the overall massing and impact on the adjacent properties. Third concern for us is the proposed removal of a front access driveway to be replaced by a rear alley access to the detached garage. In reality, an alleyway access garage will only lead to more parking congestion on the street frontage, as alley garage will rarely be used for daily coming and going parking, which is what affects the neighbors. But more important is the fact that the prevailing character of this block is that the vast majority of the homes have front access driveways. When you remove, there's 3 outlier homes that are at the top and the bottom of the street that abut the Crossways alley, so they can't really have a driveway there. There's only one home on the street that has no driveway, and that's a recent remodel. When you look at it, it looks out of place. That means 96% of the homes have front access driveways on that block. This should clearly be considered a significant characteristic of this neighborhood. Furthermore, we feel that removing the front access driveway only adds to the front-loading massing of the design proposal by allowing the house to slightly stretch sideways to the sides of the lot, which is in contradiction to the prevailing massing and siding of the other homes on the block. Additionally, is that time up or 30 seconds?
That's your warning.
Thank you. Additionally, it is in direct contradiction to the spirit of the city's neighborhood design guidelines, which suggest that measures should be taken to minimize front loading and massing. Maintaining a front access driveway would actually benefit this design's compatibility for the neighborhood. We also feel that and it's called out in the staff report, that the current gable over the roof entryway competes with the main living room gable and should be replaced or simplified with an architectural element of a sloped tile roof over it to better fall in line. Just to conclude, we wish the applicant to build and enjoy their dream home in this wonderful neighborhood, but we can encourage them to revisit and revise their proposed design for one that slightly better fits the spirit of the breathing character of the neighborhood. I do applaud the applicant's use of recessed windows, which is really important on these character-style homes.
Wrap it up, please.
And the two-part tile roof. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next speaker is Osei Luke. If I got that pronunciation correct?
I'm Osa Luke, and I'm the neighbor to 1329 Thompson. I think Philip said it all. I think the setback from the street is too far out, too. The house will kind of look odd between all other houses on the street. It will stick out much further. I'm also concerned when you hear about that fireplace that would be up against the wall into our house, and that seems like a fire hazard. I also am concerned about the windows for privacy, that they don't, if they're going to build a two-story house, that they would think about not placing the windows facing adjacent to our windows. And then the balconies, I don't think a two-story house needs 3 big balconies. Kind of odd out of that little house. That's it.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Next speaker is Timothea Workman.
I was going to pause before my name, so I know it's me coming up. My name's Timothea Workman. I live at 1324 Irving, so I'm behind the alley from this house. I've lived in the neighborhood for 26 years. I know it really well, and I don't know if you know the neighborhood, but what a former speaker was saying was that these are all smaller, older homes. It's a beautiful place. I have 7 keys to 7 of my neighbors' homes. I know them well. We look out for each other. It's a really special place. People walk up and down, like the builder was saying, he walks up and down the street a lot. We all know each other. It's a very, very special place. And this proposed idea does not fit with what's there. It's way bigger. It is massive. The fact that you don't have the driveway in it makes it spread out really wide, so it fills up the whole lot up to the 6-foot edges instead of having a driveway that's also in there. And it doesn't fit. It's going to look strange. It's going to suddenly make it be like we've got this massive mansion in this home, in this neighborhood where we have all these single-family homes that are 1-story. So that concerns me. I don't want our neighborhood to change. It's a really, really special place. And I love the fact that you guys have done so much to keep it with that integrity. Having it be Spanish style is excellent. We live in one of the nice Spanish homes on the other side of the street, I think that was mentioned, that we've taken good care of. There's so many things. Parking in the alleyway in the back. I know that people who have the side lots, or they don't park like where everybody else does in the street, park all their cars on the street. So it does end up taking up more street space. I also really don't like the idea that somebody's coming in through the back alley to park, because nobody does that in that back alley. It's completely there as kind of an emergency alley if people needed to get into their homes from behind. But that just brings up all more traffic area. I don't understand why somebody needs to have a home so large, and if they do, I don't feel like this is the right neighborhood to have it. If this is the owner's dream home, I think they should be building it in another place, because it doesn't seem to doesn't seem to fit. Also, I have, personally, I don't like the idea of a 2-story home that's going to look down into our backyard. I love our privacy. It's not like we're doing anything that's crazy back there, but it's really nice to know that when I go there, I mean, our houses are so close that I can hear my neighbors' kids running up and down their hallway at night. It's 6 feet away from each other, but it's fine. I know they're kids. It's fun. It's not a problem. But the fact that somebody is going to be looking down into our yard is just, it's kind of sad. It also cuts out the light from the neighbors next door when the sun comes in, and that's going to change whatever they're growing in their yard. So I really appreciate you guys keeping the integrity of our neighborhood together. And if there's anything we can do to reduce this so that it's not such a massive thing that's going to be out of place and that changes the quality of our neighborhood, I really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, if there's anyone else in the audience that wants to speak on this item, I would encourage you to step up forward now. Are there any callers?
There are no callers.
No
Mr.
callers.
Pro Tem.
Okay, so with that, I think I will go ahead and bring up the applicant again. He is entitled to a rebuttal based on commentary that has been heard from the public. So, Mr. Israelian.
Hi again. I'm living in that neighborhood already almost 30 years. I bought the house in 95. I know neighborhood too, very good too. Nobody, if they're saying the driveway from the street, have you seen anybody during the day coming, going inside the back of the yard, parking there, then going out again? It's kind of, I don't know. It's whatever they're saying, the driveway, it's making a little bit wider the house, and it's, when you're designing the house more wider, it's more easy for you to achieve whatever you need. And the driveway on the front, I don't think so. It's something unusual in that area. Two-story houses, there is maybe 4 or 5 houses on between Kenneth and Bel Air. It's right on the other side of our property. A couple of weeks ago, it was approved, 2-story house, couple of houses above our project. I don't think so. It's 2-story houses is not common anymore in that area. And 2,400 square foot house is not a mansion. It's for family with 2 kids. And is anybody working at home? Yeah. It's always not enough space in a house, in the small houses. I live in a small house in that neighborhood. My wife is working from the home. It's always some stuff from your work. And I don't think so. I believe it's going to be very nice addition to our neighborhood, whatever we designed. Maybe we can change a couple of things, but overall, 2,400 square foot is not a mansion. 3-bedroom house, it's not a mansion. If you have any question.
Any other questions from the board for the applicant? Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Israelian. Okay, so with that, we can, unless there's any other callers that came in the meantime, okay, so we can close the public hearing. And we will turn it over to board member deliberations. Mr. Simonian, would you care to lead us off tonight?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair Pro Temp. Overall, I wanted to thank everyone for coming out and taking the time to come out and speak on the project. My first thought is that I like the general direction of the architectural style. The Spanish style, I think, is a correct style to use, and it actually is done well. There are some details that I'm going to suggest that I think will add to the general character and style of the house, but in general, it seems to be working well. Most of the time when we have these proposals, we'll have the ADU come in afterwards. In this case, it's being kind of outlined beforehand, so we're getting a sneak peek of how it could look. But that's certainly outside our preview, but we understand how majority of the backyard is going to be taken by the ADU, which is going to be more common moving forward. In regards to the basement, which I spoke about, I feel as though the basement is adding a bit of mass to the house, because if it is completely underground and it's storage, it's one thing, but if it is causing the house to pop up, which it is in this case, although the street is on an angle, that in itself is causing some mass as well. In regards to the 2-story aspect of it, when I'm looking at the overall mass and scale of the house, especially in the 3D renderings of, let's say, as depicted on 3D, The bottom two renderings, again, putting the architectural styles, the architectural detailing aside, I should say, not the style, the architectural detailing aside, the house has pushed the second floor back from the street, which is always what we try to ask for. I feel as though it certainly could step back further, and I believe it's on the west side, the fireplace side, where if it does step back on this bottom portion, and this, roof fascia is continued along, I think that will break up the mass quite nicely on that side. So, and the second-story bedroom could come in a bit. In regards to the patio plus balconies, I do think that the upstairs balcony can be trimmed down, and I do think it is excessive in that if the patio is maintained on the ground level, but the balconies may be reduced or eliminated on the second floor and turns into more of a trellis structure, then in itself will have less of an impact on the surrounding neighbors. Plus, there's just a lot of other factors that are being packed into this house, such as, what we've described earlier, so may not be a bad idea. So, as far as the architectural styling, as I said, the Spanish style seems to be working. The details are appropriately done with the wood corbels, et cetera. I do think that it could be just tweaked a bit on really that rotunda. The front rotunda is those multiple arches could be simplified, and the long vertical windows along that west facade as well, I think, could be simplified. But I would say that if this building just steps back a bit on that bedroom side on the second floor, continues the roof as I described, and if we're able to kind of clean up some of the window styling, so the lower level is a little more consistent with the upper level, you've done a really good job with the upper level, but if the window language of the lower level starts proportionally aligning itself with the upper level, if the rear balcony is reduced in size, then I believe that the building is a good contemporary solution for an addition in a urban living scenario. Why? It's 23 and 48 square feet, so 2,300 square feet. I don't think that's an unreasonable square footage. But we could make some changes to it to make it more compatible, and that would be some of my suggestions. As far as the basement's concerned, they could legally have it if we're able to come up with a way where, even if it's pushed down a foot, it'll reduce your stairs going up to the entry, which will reduce the monumentality of the entryway, and it'll be more in line with the neighbors. So, if for whatever reason you want to have it as storage, fine, but if it does come down a bit, and it'll actually help because you won't have as many stairs going up from the street, which is never a good thing for your guests. You want more direct entry. Because once you put a lot of these stairs in your entryway, you're not going to like it at the end. It's going to be just too much. So those would be some of my thoughts, Mr. Chair Pro Temp, and as always, I'm open for other thoughts and ideas as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Board Member Chagayan?
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem. This one, I'm a little torn because I appreciate that you took what was the existing home and honored that style. And I think from an architectural stylistic standpoint, I like the fact that it's a Spanish style. And again, two-story homes, 2,300 square foot, we've seen those and approved those in the past, and I think I'm not opposed to it. I do feel like from a site planning perspective, in this neighborhood with this lot, that the taking away the driveway and the garage from the entering from the front is a mistake here, only because it will help reduce the mass from the street side. And I do think it's needed in this condition with the context that it's in. And Board Member Simonian's right. Normally, we don't see the ADU, or I think it's also outside of our purview. We're not supposed to comment on that one. But knowing that you are planning for an ADU back there, I think it's actually going to be even better to have the garage, have the driveway from the front and separate the living spaces and, allow for a separate backyard for that ADU. I appreciate the setback of the second story. That's further, pushed back. I agree that it does need to come in from the sides as well. I also think the front needs a little bit more work in terms of like lowering the roofs. I think it's a little bit disproportionate right now. And that rotunda as well is something that I highlighted, that I think maybe you can, instead of 5 windows, reduce it to 3, because even the existing home had the 3 facing the street, and it feels a little bit better proportionally. Otherwise, I also agree with the staff member conditions, but I feel like it needs a little bit more tweaking from my perspective.
Okay, thank you. And Board Member Cascani.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do concur with my fellow board member as well. I do like the overall Spanish style of the home. I think that you all did a great job. The first thing and first off, thank you for everyone for coming out and making comments as well. I really appreciate it. I believe you came a couple of weeks ago too to make some comments on some houses similar, so it's good to see the community engaged. But I do agree, the front rotunda was like the first thing that I kind of like, the focal point that was like drawing my attention. I think there was a lot going on over there, especially with the 4 windows that Board Member Simonian did bring up on the side as well. I think there's just a lot going on with the windows on the bottom. The rear balcony, I do agree that needs to be reduced. I think there's a lot going on. It doesn't need to be that big. With the front, the driveway as well in the front, I do think that there needs to be the driveway in the back, and it will help with the overall mass with the house as well. But overall, with the roof itself, I think there's a lot going on the front facade. So I think scaling it down a little bit would definitely help. And I do agree with a lot of the comments that the staff also brought up. But those are just a couple of things that just pointed out to me.
Okay, thank you. I would also like to echo my thanks to the public for coming out. It's always appreciated when we get feedback, because a lot of times if we don't hear from the neighborhood, we don't know how the neighborhood really feels. So in that case, we're just kind of acting on our own initiative, and it's always good to hear what the public feels about it. I'm going to agree and disagree with some of my fellow board members here. I did a site visit here to the street. I have walked the streets, and this is one of those streets where the prevailing setback of homes is considerably more than what the code allows. So the setbacks of most of the other homes are further back than what is legally allowed. So when you have a house being proposed that's mid-block and stepping forward to get closer to the legal setback, it does create an anomalous situation that is not going to help blend it in there. So the discussion about the driveway and the garage location, this is where I'm going to disagree, because I think in a situation like this, it actually is beneficial to not have a driveway from the street, that you could use the access for the alleyway. It's what it was built for originally. I know a lot of these homes weren't actually built to utilize it, but that was its original purpose. So to take advantage of that, it really helps enable the better site planning of the house, and you can get a more compact design in a tighter area. But in this case, they're pushing both of those boundaries. They're pushing to the sides and they're pushing towards the street. And in my mind, it's like, okay, you can have maybe one of those things, but you can't have both. So I think that the whole house really should shift back a little bit, because it is really not in line with the rest of the homes on the street. And I think that if you just shift the whole house back maybe 4 or 5 feet, so it's a little bit closer into alignment, it will significantly help alleviate the massing appearance that it has, that it presents to the street in comparison to the neighborhood surrounding it. I totally agree with my fellow board members about the rotunda thing, the excessive amount of windows there. It definitely needs to be simplified. I think a 3, bay sort of look would be more appropriate there. I also think that the little shed above the entryway there, the additional gable that's protruding out there, completely unnecessary. I think it would be better to just have it in line with the same plane as the living room wall. The slope of the roof can just carry down, and you can have just an opening for that porch that is more in keeping with a traditional Spanish-style design. Let me see here. So one of the windows on the second floor, I believe it is in the laundry room. It is a horizontal window and not in keeping at all with the rest of the windows. It was really out of place for me. I'd be more in favor of either eliminating it, or if you have one there, make it similar to the windows that are on the left-hand side on the staircase, with the vertical orientation, maybe with the metal cross across the front, the decorative arch, decorative cross. I think that would be more in keeping, or maybe you do round or something that is more in character with Spanish, because a little horizontal window there in that location is not in character. So I'd be in favor of either removing it or putting one in that is similar to that style, maybe even creating 2 of them that can sit on either side and be a little bit more symmetrical across that front gable. Any of those solutions could work.
Bless you.
And then finally, the rear balcony. Totally concur with my fellow board members. It's very big. It's very excessive. I think it could be scaled down. I think having the little, hip roof that goes around it just adds to sort of the massing of it. And if it could be scaled back and be, I think as Board Member Simonian suggested, maybe a little bit smaller in scale with a trellis or something like that, I think that would help considerably on that, so you still get the benefit of sort of an enclosure, but not such a massive enclosure. So I believe that concludes my thoughts on the matter. Generally, again, I think I agree with my fellow board members. The style is good. You're doing the right thing in terms of blending it into the neighborhood with the Spanish style, which is a predominant style there, and keeping with the current style of the house. So, from that perspective, I think you're very close to what it could be. But those are my thoughts about what we need to do to make it more blend into the neighborhood. So, reactions?
One question.
Yeah.
And maybe best to start off with staff on the question and then to come back. My question would be to staff is, what is the minimum front setback in this area?
I believe it's 25 feet, but I can confirm if you give me just a second. Yeah, 25 feet.
25. And I noticed that this applicant has 28 feet on one side and 31'4" on the other side, which is the rotunda side. So the rotunda side is 31'4", and in regards to the prevailing setback, though, do we know what that prevailing setback may be on the street?
I should have it in the survey. If you give me a second, I can pull it up.
And while staff is looking that up, we could maybe move on to other questions or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, you also raised the point about the basement, and I think that that's exactly right. It should be lowered down, so at least one side of the house, whichever is the higher side, the floor plate should be, approximately at ground level or maybe a little bit above that to
That will
help
help with,
reduce the overall massing, yes.
So I guess while staff is looking that up, the main discrepancy seems to be site planning in regards to the driveway. Ms. Chagayan, you made that observation, but I forget what other thoughts were there on the driveway. Did you have any thoughts on the
He
driveway?
also thought,
Yeah, but I think that the ADU is not in our preview, right? We
it
don't
is
we don't
not.
look into that.
We cannot, is your mic on?
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the primary things was I didn't put the ADU into account whenever I was making those comments, but I guess it's not in our purview to make that as well.
Yeah, in regards to putting this project aside and this block aside, as far as overall direction of alleys, in my opinion, in that they should be utilized. And I feel as though an alley is there for that purpose. And moving forward, as congested as things are going to be with ADUs and whatnot, we need to utilize our alleys, or we're just not taking advantage of some built, thoroughfares and access points. So I don't particularly have an issue with that. But in regards to the front setback, it'd be good to know what the prevailing is.
The neighborhood average is 33 feet.
And do you know the existing homes setback?
I don't know the existing.
I think it's pretty much in line with the prevailing. So we're talking about between 2 and 8 feet ahead of where all the other homes are in the neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, I would say, even like trying to keep a round figure of, say, 5 feet. Let's just say, if 5 feet is increased, in which case, on one side, it would be, 36'4", which would be above the average. And on the other side, it would be 30 feet or below. So in average, it would be in line. But just for discussion purposes, a 5-foot setback, further setback, would basically be about a third of that rear patio, more or less. And is that the end of the world for it to push back? No. The patio is big. So that is not, I think, the end of the world. However, it wasn't the first thing that popped out. I would say I'm okay with the garage being accessed from the rear. I particularly don't have an issue with that, and I'm looking at it as a whole wide, citywide, direction. I'm okay with that. In regards to the setback being increased, if the board feels as though maybe 5 feet is appropriate, I'll go along with that. I don't think it will have as big of an impact on the overall design layout. However, I feel more strongly about the balcony at the rear, the second floor balcony at the rear. And I think that's more of a incompatibility with the neighborhood than the 5-foot setback. If I had to maybe talk about how that would affect the overall immediate neighbors in regards to the overall direction of the block, the compatibility of the prevailing setback is more important, I guess. But I could go either way with that. But in general, I think you asked for my thoughts, at least the driveway off the rear, don't have an issue with.
I am complete agreement. I think it's wasted real estate, urban real estate, if we don't utilize it properly, and I think that it is important. They've created an extra driveway back there, so you can still accommodate parking for 4 cars back there between the garage and the driveway. So I think it's still an appropriate use. But I do think that the setback at the front is important. It's probably, to me, it's, if the balcony is the most important for you, I think the setback is the most important for me, because when I was there at the site looking at the story poles, it's very prominent, how much different it is than the immediately adjoining properties. And so I think that anything that we can do to shift it backwards from how it presents to the street will be helpful.
Well, Mr. Khan, what are your thoughts on the front setback? I would love to hear those.
Well, I think I actually didn't get to see the story poles, but I think what's helping is that the first level is within the prevailing setbacks, right? Like, so the second story doesn't start until well beyond the prevailing setback, but I also didn't see what you saw, so.
Well, I think part of it too is that the height is, the whole footprint is raised up
Right.
because of the basement, so maybe.
I think that's adding a lot.
Yeah, I think
Well,
it's
and
definitely.
the width, right?
And the
Because-
width
And it
too,
goes back
but
to the
yes,
driveway,
yeah.
so.
Right.
So maybe we could compromise on something, maybe push it back 3 feet away from that and reduce it down for the floor plate, which will help mitigate both of those.
Well, okay. Mr. Khan, are you okay with 3 feet, or you feel as though keeping it as is? What are some thoughts on that?
I am clearly not aligned with you guys tonight, so I would say keep it amongst yourselves.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, again, the setback is not a big thing with me on this scenario. I do concur that the second story is set back
Yeah.
past the prevailing, and so that's why I'm asking your opinion on it, because you did have some comments about the driveway, and so as far as a consensus is concerned,
yeah.
for that reason, to make sure everyone's there's a consensus in that area, if you're okay with the setback as is, I'll go along with that. If you feel as though you need to increase it as well, we'll go along with that as well, maybe 3 feet more, just shift the whole thing. It seems as though we're okay, maybe talking about the architectural detailing of the windows, all that is figured out, maybe moving that second story bedroom in a bit on the west side as well to continue the roof line across the west setback and connecting it. Maybe reducing or further depressing the basement a foot, thereby eliminating a couple of steps from the entry, pushing the facade down a foot. Seems all those are compromises, so maybe if you so choose, maybe make a motion with those conditions and however you feel about the front setback, and we can maybe move on to the big item on our tonight's agenda.
But let's make sure we're clear about the staff's conditions. So they had proposed conditions that was relating to the windows at the front facade and the treatment overall at the front facade. Are we all in general agreement that staff's condition there is appropriate, that they should simplify, reduce the monumentality, and then clean up the window arrangements around that's the dining room area? And I agree with you, Board Member Simoni, about not only the windows on the front, on the round portion, but also on the side. They're not quite right. So I think that if we just have the condition be, restudy the window plan to be more consistent with the Spanish style, simpler, and have it be generally reflected. That would also capture that second floor window that I had called out too.
Okay. That seems to cover it.
Okay? And then I think the second condition was about that arched window being centered, but I also think that it's already been captured. Ms. Cuffell, do you agree that that's covered, or should we just leave it in there as a fail-safe?
It's been covered.
It's been covered,
So
the
we can
centering.
delete that probably.
Okay. So then, that's covered, so it's really up to whoever's going to make the motion to whatever additional conditions that you want to layer on to make a motion.
Make a motion?
I'm the chair, I can't.
Mr. Chair Pro Tem, would it be helpful that maybe staff can reiterate some of the things that we heard, and so that you can kind of take this cumulatively as far as what you're introducing?
Sure.
I'll read off my notes, and if you can add anything.
Great.
Yeah. Sorry, I know we already addressed about the basement, so I'm going to kind of revisit some of these things here. I heard that moving in the west elevation, that would be referred as the bedroom on the second floor, moving that in so that it would help alleviate some of the massing from the street, reduce the balcony at the rear, and potentially introducing more of a trellis structure, so it reduces the size of the balcony at the rear. And what I heard about the rotunda was reduce the amount of arches and simplify the windows. There was a comment that was provided that reducing the numbers from 5 to 3, kind of recalling from the original style of the Spanish-style building. Sorry, we settled on the driveway that, well, I heard from 2 that they would like for the driveway to return, and 2, they're okay with it being alley loaded. And I apologize, I'm only pausing to go further down.
I think we settled on the driveway being rear access from the
okay.
alley as okay,
Thank you.
in conjunction with everything else that's happening that we're talking about.
Sure, and there was a comment about the gable front entry, potentially reducing it, removing it so that it would just be in straight line, more of a traditional style Spanish-style home. And then the laundry, I think we can encompass a condition about all the windows. It was about the laundry room, the rotunda, the side windows. It would just be to restudy the windows throughout the house, that it's more complementary to, and be consistent with the Spanish-style home. So that's what I have in my notes. Would you like to add anything else?
No, I
Ms.
have
Koppel?
the same
Okay.
things.
Okay.
Is there an amount you want to cut the balcony by, or is it just up to staff discretion?
Well, I would say let's put that aside for a moment until we figure out the setback, because if the building is being pushed back, it's gonna make an effect on the balcony and the patio, et cetera. So it seems like, are we all in line with all the conditions that were stated so far?
Yeah, it captured reducing the height of the building, right? You captured that in your discussion, yes?
Correct. I think it was the one last of them, but forgive me, yes, we were talking about reducing so that the overall height of the basement would be reduced by a foot, so that the stairway
Go
case
down,
would go down,
yeah.
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
So, and the reason why I was, hoping somebody else would make the motion, just to be in the spirit of a consensus, because I think most of the time, on these kind of projects, we do have consensus. Not that it's important, not that it's ideal, but when there are such different viewpoints, it's good to study something and take the time to make sure it's the right decision we're making, because most of the time, we all agree. And so when we don't, it's something that to be considered. And so I do think that increasing the prevailing setback by not 8 feet, I think that'd be too much. 5 feet, I even think that's too much. But I think 3 feet would basically more or less get us there. Because what that would do is it would decrease the amount of the patio, which ultimately would lend itself naturally to more of a reduced mass along the back, reduced trellis, reduce privacy issues, et cetera. So I'd be okay by suggesting an increase of 3 feet, or just shifting the building back 3 feet, that's it, as is. So the condition, and I'll put this out there and we'll see where it goes, is the stated conditions. I move to approve the stated conditions as stated, with one addition of setting back the building an additional 3 feet on the ground level, and that would be my motion.
Any discussion on the motion before we proceed? No? Okay. All right.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, this will be roll call. I have a motion by Board Member Simonian and a second by Board Member Kaskanian. Board Member Kaskanian?
Yes.
Board Member Simonian?
Yes.
Board Member Chikayan?
No.
And Mr. Chair Pro Tem Welsh.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries 3-1. Okay, moving on to the second item this evening, which we have, is in regards to code amendments for the new objective design standards and for multifamily and residential mixed-use development in commercial zones. I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Teresa Santolina and co-presented by Vilya Zematitis. And just give us a moment while they're shifting of staff members.
Thank you.
And if you don't mind, we need one moment, please.
Hi, hello.
We're back for round two.
We are, actually, we are indeed. One second, this is.
100%.
It's not my login, so do you need me to log in again?
No way we'll get this done in 40 minutes.
You have to be out in 40
Yes.
minutes? No, their presentation is probably going to take 40 minutes.
So just an FYI for the audience, so Board Member Kaskanian does have a hard out, and he must leave by 6:45. So if you all of a sudden don't see him during the rest of the hearing, don't be surprised.
Yes. Like a lot. It was a lot now. Like.
Yes.
Okay, are we ready to proceed with the item?
We
Okay,
are.
very good. So
Thank
I will
you
turn it
very
over
much
to Vilya.
for-
Thank you.
This is when I wish I would have brought my family.
Okay. All right. Good evening, Board. Good evening. Yes, and I'd like to introduce also Teresa Santolina, who you met last time as well when we were giving the presentation on the multifamily residential zoning code amendments and objective design standards. This was back in, it's hard to believe, in February. And we are back now with the code amendments and objective design standards for multifamily and mixed-use developments in commercial zones. So just for that clarification, we're going to go into it. We do have two different projects, two different zoning districts that are running on parallel tracks and with some overlapping concepts as well. So we'll be going into that. And last time. as
Mr.
well.
Chair?
Yes.
I have one quick question, and just so I could put this in context. I know City Council made comments to the multifamily objective standards.
We're going to address that as well. So yes.
And so has that been ratified yet? Is that moving, is that the new objectives yet? Has it come on board or not yet? As
So-
far as our overall city zoning is concerned?
Thank you. So our PowerPoint presentation will be addressing that. The objective design and certain concepts were presented to the City Council in April. These focused on the multifamily standards, on the multifamily
project. However, many of those concepts apply also to the mixed use, to the mixed multifamily and mixed use residential in commercial zones. So based on council's direction, council did provide that direction for both projects. This particular presentation before you incorporates city council's direction as of April.
But
Okay.
none of them have been adopted as ordinances yet.
None of them have been adopted. This is purely, at this point in time, this is draft. Both of these two projects, two sets of objective design standards and associated development standards are in draft form. They're being presented to you today for your comments. No decision is being made. Your comments will be forwarded them on. We will be having public outreach meetings, which we'll discuss at the end of the meeting. We have a slide on that, and your comments, the public's comments are going to be taken into account, and then the draft finalized for presentation to the Planning Commission next, and then going back to City Council. So,
Perfect, thank you. And one last question. With the multifamily objective standards that we all discussed 2 months ago, what was the FAR on the 1250? What did it go? It went from 1.2 to what? And I'm asking because there was a letter sent, and so I'm just trying to understand what that was on those objectives. I forget.
and Board Member Simonian, that is a good question regarding the letter that was sent, and we'd like to address that at the end of the presentation, because I think there might be clarification. But as for the FAR for the multifamily, actually, I don't believe we raised the FAR for the multifamily. That was kept at 1.2, and this would be a 1.2 FAR in the multifamily residential zones. So the letter that you're referring to is a letter from the Adams Hill organization, from Ms. Rondi Warner. She has a number of comments that were made, and yes, so the FAR is not being changed in the multifamily residential districts, in their typical,
That stayed at 1.2. I thought
That
it had
is-
gone up, so it stayed at 1.2.
no, I believe it stayed at 1.2.
Okay.
However, for commercial zones, that is being eliminated in order to achieve the allowable density in the commercial building envelope based on the
Which we'll get
height.
to, which we'll
Which
get
we will get to, yes.
To answer my question, it's still 1.2 on the multifamily
Correct.
side. Okay, thank you.
It's still 1.2 in the traditional multifamily residential districts.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. However, we are having technical difficulties because it is not moving, the project is not moving forward. And what did you, that was
Just
odd.
double-clicked.
Double-clicked, okay. So, as stated on the screen, we have two projects. One is the multifamily project, which would be specifically addressing the residential districts in the chapter 30.11 with updates to the standards and objective design standards. And then what we are going to call the MFMU project, which refers to the multifamily and mixed use development standards in commercial zones that are going to be eliminating the R1250 standards and providing new standards to replace those, and as well as objective design standards for multifamily and mixed-use projects in commercial zones. So here, the slide before you, to provide context where the new standards would apply. This is the map of the city showing the multifamily residential neighborhoods in gold and the commercial zones located along commercial corridors and centers in red. So again, these zones that we're discussing this evening are the zones located along major streets such as Colorado, Broadway, Glendale Avenue, South Central Avenue, and parts of Glen Oaks and Foothill. The multifamily residential projects, new site planning and massing and scale concepts were presented to City Council in November, stakeholders at the end of the year as well. And the actual draft code language for the multifamily project was presented to the DRB back in February. And then we had a meeting with the local architects group shortly thereafter for their comments as well, as directed by the DRB. Now, the mixed-use project, the MFMU project, the proposed code amendments were presented to council at the end of February, and comments and concerns raised by the DRB and the architects group on the multifamily project were presented to city council in early April. So that is when council provided additional direction that applies to both projects. And today's presentation focuses on the commercial districts. During council's initial review, and this was back in February, council was supportive of the proposed changes and directed staff to proceed with finalizing the ordinance, eliminating the R16 or the R1250 zoning code standards, introducing wider streetscape setbacks for improved pedestrian-oriented rights-of-way, and also introducing new massing and scale concepts and architectural element concepts. And these were similar to the MF projects that you saw, including menu options for facade articulation, roof lines, and fenestration. So council's focused review of the certain objective design standards in early April resulted in direction for the mixed-use project in terms of roof lines, materials, colors, and fenestration, and staff will be discussing these topics in great detail later in the presentation. So we'll leave that for now. As noted also in the multifamily residential project, these code amendments were directed as part of the SB2 grant program, and staff has been working with Crandall Arambula to update the commercial zoning standards, and this would be to streamline residential and mixed-use development in commercial corridors and centers. Note that Crandall Arambula also prepared many of the same concepts and diagrams being presented to you today. Okay, these updates are vital since current commercial standards only allow for multifamily residential development in commercial zones based on the existing R1250 high-density standards. These standards, the R1250 standards, are intended for traditional multifamily residential neighborhoods. They've proven to be too stringent and restricted residential and mixed-use development in commercial zones. The very few mixed-use projects that we have had developed over the last decades, and there are very few of them, have required numerous variances from the R1250 standards or have had various concessions and waivers for those that featured affordable units and density bonuses. Proposed updates would eliminate the application of these R1250 standards, provide new standards, and obviously incorporate objective design standards. And this work is part of the community development's efforts to create an improved entitlement and streamlined review process. So this would increase the certainty of multifamily and mixed-use development in commercial areas. We'd be removing the current CUP requirements and standards that requires variances and ensure for livability and design compatibility in commercial areas as well. Last but not least, the updates are in line with recent state legislation requiring that all design standards be objective, measurable, quantifiable, and it also fulfills certain housing element programs as highlighted in detail in your staff report. So this slide addresses the first half of the project, which would be updates to the development standards. Currently, multifamily projects, and as you know, multifamily residential portions of mixed-use projects have to comply with all of the R1250 standards. So no changes are being proposed in terms of density. It's going to remain at 43 units to the acre maximum for lots greater than 90 feet. Other standards to be updated to be more in line with traditional typical mixed-use developments, such as lot coverage, setbacks, and open space. And meanwhile, the current R1250 height limit right now, 2 stories or 3 stories, depending on the lot width, that is being eliminated, and the height limit would then fall to what is the current height limit in the applicable commercial zone. So whatever the height limit is that you would be allowed for any commercial project would be the height limit that would be allowed for a mixed-use project as well. With that, I'd like to turn the PowerPoint presentation over to Teresa to continue with the actual objective design standards.
Thank you, Vilia. So this project does have a few overarching goals. Vilia touched on the recent state legislation that requires that any new development standards be objective, quantifiable, and measurable. So that is the first goal with this project. We also sought to ensure that the way the ordinance was structured was going to be something that was within a familiar format. So the way it's been organized is to address site planning first, and then moving on to massing and scale, and then finally touching on the architectural elements. The new objective design standards are drafted to ensure quality development that's articulated and not overly boxy by requiring modulation both horizontally and vertically, as well as articulated facade elevations. So moving right into those site planning standards, the site planning updates really focus on the elimination of those R1250 residential standards. So while the R1250 does require a minimum 20-foot landscaped front setback, there are essentially no front setback requirements in many of the commercial zones, and projects can be built basically at the front property line. So in some cases, that would be as close as 7 feet to the curb face. The new standards are actually focusing more on the pedestrian realm, and this is consistent with the Tropico TOD standards that were approved last year. So the new setback would actually be a 12-foot dimension from the curb face to the wall face to create a nice pedestrian realm. This would allow for accessibility and street trees as well. That 12-foot standard would apply at the ground floor. Stories above the ground floor could potentially go up to a 10-foot minimum setback from curb face or to the property line, whichever of the two is closer to the street. Then moving on to our massing and scale section, you may recall the horizontal and vertical modulation concepts that we discussed in the multifamily project. These standards aim to reduce the bulk of buildings, avoid massive boxy structures, and provide transitions in height between new and existing buildings. Horizontal modulation is going to be a new definition. It's defined as variations across the facade, such as recess to break up the horizontality of a building into defined building segments. Whereas vertical modulation refers to variations in heights, which could be achieved by creating a step back of the upper stories of a building. The vertical modulation standards require greater transitions in height when a project is adjacent to a residential zone or is located on a sloped lot. Massing and scale standards also include facade articulation regulations, which introduced architectural elements that help to break down large segments of building facades into smaller scale segments. And the facade articulation standards feature a new menu options, which we'll go over later in the presentation. So here we have our horizontal modulation. The horizontal modulation concepts require that building facades be broken into segments. Here in the commercial zones, any facade that is on an elevation that's greater than 90 feet in length would be required to have a recess so that it would be broken into 3 segments. The recess segment would be required to be a minimum of 40 feet wide and a maximum of 60 feet wide and have a minimum depth dimension of at least 10 feet. The horizontal recessed modulated facade is required to go at least from the second story to the top of the building. It is allowed but not required at the ground floor as well. We are encouraging it at the ground floor, but in a mixed-use project with a commercial or retail use at the ground floor may not always be appropriate. Vertical modulation provides that height transition. We can see in this graphic it's stepping back. The modulation reduces the top of the building. It also reduces shade and shadow onto adjacent properties and public sidewalks. The vertical modulation standards would apply when a multifamily or mixed-use development is greater than 45 feet in height At that point, the top floors would then have to be set back 10 feet from the front elevation and 5 feet from all of the interior elevations. And then when a project does abut a residentially zoned property, additional setbacks and stepbacks apply. So a 10-foot setback at the ground floor would be applicable, and then above the second story, an additional 10 feet with a step back. We also are going to be,
Quick question.
Yes.
Residentially zoned property, would that be including single-family zones?
yes,
So
single,
it doesn't matter whether it's multifamily or single-family, it's just the one 10-foot setback?
correct.
Okay, because some of these C zones do abut single-family neighborhoods, yes?
Yes, they
Yes,
do. Sorry, just 1 second. Oh, okay. Billy is going to be verifying the exact wording in the ordinance, make sure that that's accurate information, and we'll get back to that. Also want to point out that there will be additional standards, transition standards for sloped properties, like you might find along Foothill. We don't have a graphic to demonstrate that just yet, as that is getting lined out. So moving on to our massing and articulation modulation. The objective design standards provide a variety of facade articulation options. These are similar to the options that you saw with the multifamily project in February. New projects will be required to incorporate at least one of these facade articulation options onto each elevation of the project. Architects and designers can choose from these options. They should be adding visual interest and help to reduce the massing of the building. And we're going to go over each of these options with some real-world examples. We also have a couple of additional options that have been generated since our meeting in February, and so we'll be showing some examples of those as well. So first, we have our horizontal bands. Horizontal bands help define the floor plates of a building and accentuate horizontality of a building. Then we have our framed projections. We can see a variety of shapes in these images here. Framed projections would essentially be framing the top and sides of a building facade to break it into more rhythmic segments. And we have recessed balconies, which provide some depth to those building facades. Now, the consultant specified that recessed balconies can be used as an articulation option, but we also have a provision in the new ordinance that would allow for balconies that are not one of those options that could actually project from the building face, as long as it's not projecting over any public right-of-way area. And then we have our horizontal recessed notch, which is essentially a greater setback at the ground floor with the second story and above cantilevering over. Projecting bays allow bay window elements to project out from the main facade plane, as we can see in these images. And vertical
And the
recess,
projected bays project over a public right-of-way?
no.
No, okay.
Vertical recess notch features a recess that goes through all of the stories of the building and provides kind of a break across the building elevation. Vertical recess notches are not required at the first floor, but they are permitted at the first floor. And some of the graphics to be drafted would include canopies and awnings on the upper stories of a multifamily or residential mixed-use building. And finally, we also will be adding graphics for brise soleil, which would add an interesting geometry to the building facades as well as provide passive cooling to the buildings. Another main subsection of the objective design standards is architectural elements. This includes standards related to vents, gutters, downspouts, as well as materials and colors of facades, roof forms, and balconies, as well as fenestration options, canopies, things of that nature. DRB and a group of local architects provided a lot of input on some of these particular items. And we presented that conversation to City Council and did get some feedback from Council, which is noted here in red. So particularly with the primary facade, the materials list has been updated so that it lists only prohibited materials rather than permitted materials. It also has updated the limits on EFIS to be consistent with those found in our downtown specific plan. The direction from council was not to regulate color, with the exception of limiting neon or fluorescent paint colors solely to trim elements on a building. Council also concurred with DRB and with local architects to not restrain roof design. And so the ordinances have been amended to allow for any roof design. However, there would still be a vertical modulation requirement for long, flat roofs. And finally, again, concurring with the recommendations of DRB and the local architects group, the fenestration menus will allow for any type of window shape and not be restricted to just rectangular window shapes. And so looking right at those fenestration options, we have the vertical stacked option, which is when the window height is greater than the width. Those types of windows could be aligned either on center or at an edge. Horizontal stacked is basically when the window is wider than it is tall, and the alignment would be very similar either on center or on an edge. We have pattern offset option, which would allow for window arrangement to alternate rhythmically on each floor of the building. And then the curtain wall features a wall of windows that can span multiple stories. Another fenestration option is the grouped framed window design, in which windows are kind of set within a frame that would extend over more than one floor. Oftentimes the frame would be offset from the building and then have a distinguishing feature such as a change in material or a change in color. And then ungrouped framed would be features a grouping of windows that are not set within a frame. And just to note, those different window shapes will be permitted and will not be limited to rectangles. We found some interesting options. Finally, the objective design standards concludes with standards that are going to be related to ground floor residential treatments, distinguishing entryways to the residential from any commercial area, as well as facade transparency at the ground floor. The regulations also touch upon freestanding walls, fences, and gates, outdoor utility location, outdoor lighting, and residential private storage space. And Villia is going to take it from here.
So, we have come to that part of the presentation where we are looking to the DRB to provide feedback on a number of these concepts and development standards. The first being the actual development standards themselves, with the elimination of the R1250 standards. Staff is proposing to eliminate the 1.2 FAR. And again, this would be the FA, when we refer to FAR, we're referring to the floor area ratio. This would be essentially the percentage, or I should say the total amount of floor area divided by the lot square footage. So for instance, a 1.2 FAR would essentially be if you had a full 50 by 150 lot, 7,500 square feet, you'd probably be getting around 8.5 thousand square foot building, roughly arranged on maybe one and a half stories, if that is possible. We feel that elimination of the floor area would get these mixed-use projects to a level of density that is permitted by right, and it would still be consistent with the building envelope that would be allowed for any other type of commercial building. So you're not changing the massing, you're just basically allowing for development potential to be increased, what you would normally see, that is. Lot coverage, right now, R1250 is at a maximum 50% of your lot. This would be pretty standard for traditional multifamily residential neighborhoods that have great landscaped front yards, landscaped side yards, open spaces at the rear. In this case, because this is a dense urban environment to begin with, and these are located along commercial streets that have active transportation available, people are walking and whatnot, there's, a tendency that what you would see in an urban environment, you're not seeing a 50% lot coverage in this type of context. And so staff is proposing to eliminate that. It is up to the board and your feedback whether to do so, or instead perhaps limit it to a specific percentage that is greater than 50%. And last but not least, staff is recommending that height be allowed to go to what is permitted for any other type of development in the commercial zone. So for instance, looking at the C1, and this was part of the proposed ordinance included in your staff report on page 7, the maximum density in a or I should say the maximum height in a C1 zone is 25 feet. That is not changing. So any type of residential or mixed-use residential project in the C1 zone would remain at 25 feet. C2, that goes up depending on which district you're located in, whether it's 35 feet or 45 feet. C3 is the more intensive commercial zone, so that goes up to 50 feet in District 1, 65 in District 2, and et cetera, et cetera. So again, this would be, we're just proposing to have it consistent with what is permitted by right for commercial buildings. Next, and I'm not sure if you'd like us to pause here and to get your feedback now, or if you'd like us to run through the rest of the feedback slides and then either pause for your feedback in general, or I do know that we have some public comments as well. So if you'd like to hear that prior to providing your feedback, that would be up to the board. So how would you wish?
Yeah, I think we can all make notes, but since we do have a member of the public here, I mean, we have callers, we should go through the presentation, allow them to give comments, and then we can weigh in.
Great. So just to continue on, we're looking for feedback on site planning, and the site planning would be the reduced setbacks, whether 12 feet from the curb face to a build-to line is appropriate for the ground floor, whether a 10-foot minimum build-to line on the upper floors is appropriate. And again, this would be just an overarching street front setback from the curb face. So it would require additional a public access easement on the ground floor just to ensure that there's a pedestrian wider sidewalk, there's room for street trees, and just to ensure that there is this pedestrian-oriented experience on the ground floor on these commercial corridors and in the commercial centers.
Mr. Chair Pro Tem, question on this slide, just before we get too far ahead. Currently, how do our front setback, how does our front setback read in commercial zones for development?
It depends on which zone it's located in. Some of the commercial zones do not have a street front setback, so their front property line would essentially be their build-to line.
And which ones would those be, like a C2 or a C3? Or?
So those would be located on your page 6.
Mm-hmm.
So in a C1 or C2 zone, the street front setback is 5 feet at the ground floor.
Okay.
And then there is no setback in the C3 zone.
0. So, for example, just so I understand, if for example, if we move forward with what is being depicted, we're really increasing the setback on the C3 zone from 0 to something more, potentially, with this.
It depends on the street public right-of-way. So it would all depend on what the actual curb face to property line dimension would be. Sometimes this is completely in line. Otherwise, if it is off by, let's say there's a 10-foot curb face to property line, it would require an additional 2-foot setback. However, what we're gaining in this would be a consistent street front public right-of-way and a pedestrian-oriented experiences. That was as directed by City Council. So they are definitely primed to make sure that there's adequate sidewalk and street trees on these commercial corridors. So yes, they're.
And what is the majority of, has there been a study done? What is the ground floor dimension from the curb of face to the property lines in our city?
Again, they vary on each and every commercial district. We can tell you right now that it varies anywhere from from what I've seen myself, it has gone down to 8 feet, which essentially is a very limited pedestrian experience, to 10 feet to 12 feet, and it would all depend on which street. And it varies even on streets, because if you notice, Colorado has the bulb outs in certain locations for traffic palming, and then they have the street widening. So there is no set standard, and in this case, we would essentially be ensuring that there is an adequate pedestrian experience on these commercial corridors.
But bulb outs, I think that I read where they were not being
They would not be,
counted.
correct. They would not be that would not be included in, as part of the addition, the required.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, this would be the first time that the code would be using a curb face as like the driving, right? Because it's
Actually-
usually with property line, isn't it?
Correct. However, no, actually in the downtown specific plan area and in the Tropico Center that was recently adopted, both of those used,
A recent adoption.
they have a build to line. So both DSP has used that, it depends on the streetscape typology. You're looking at a 15 to 18 foot dimension, whether it's a residential mixed use, which would be a 15-foot from curb face to property line, or on the commercial mixed-use development streets in the DSP, there's an 18-foot setback from the curb face to the property line. So in this case, we're proposing 12.
But those are very different scale. You might have 18
Correct.
feet, but you could go up 25 stories. So I mean, it's
Correct.
very different, yeah. In regards to, let's say, the C3, because let's say the C3 is supposed to be the most commercialized of our zones.
Yes.
And so when we're comparing a C1 to a C3, C3 should have more buildable rights, because that's where you want the density, because when we did the zoning, we figured that's where a C3 should be. So with the thought of increasing the front setback to 12 feet from the curb face, is the rear setback being altered by any way as well? I guess if it's abutting a residential area, currently, how would the code read? Because I assume what is being modified here is a 10-foot, let's say, setback if it abuts residential, so.
Correct. On page 7, as you'll note, in the development land use chart, so when it's not abutting in a residential zone, that's going to remain the same, which is none. There's no setback requirement if it is not abutting a residential zone. However, there will be a 5-foot minimum setback for residential portions of mixed-use or residential buildings. So that is going to be a 5-foot setback for residential portions at the rear. If, however, you are abutting an interior, if you have an interior property line abutting a residential zone, whether it be single-family or multifamily, there was a slide that was depicting the setback as a minimum of 10 foot on the ground floor and an additional 10-foot step back on an upper floor. I believe it's on the second floor and above, which would be sort of consistent with the adjacent development pattern, whether it's a 2-story single-family house or a taller 3-story multifamily residential. So
And which diagram would that be?
that would be diagram number,
Is that page 21?
yes.
But the standards are actually written on page 20.
Okay. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, the diagram on page 20, this is a mid-block property, and it has an interior lot line. And so the interior setback on the ground level would be what if it's adjacent to residential?
As stated, for projects abutting residential zones, if the commercial zone requires a fixed setback, the third floor and above shall be set back an additional 10 feet minimum on facades adjacent to the residential zones. And if the commercial zones include a minimum average setbacks, the average setback shall be increased an additional 5 feet. So when you're looking at the land use chart,
Is that in addition to the ground level setback? Because the way that the diagram is depicted on page 20, there's definitely a setback from the interior lot line
Right,
to
and-
the ground level.
and
So
these-
that's what my question is, are we adding a setback on top of a setback on an interior lot line?
So the diagram, unfortunately, does need to be updated to be reflected, and that's one of the items that staff is aware of, and this is just the draft form, but we thought it best to include some sort of pictorial image so that people have a point of discussion. So in this case, when you are having a project abutting a residential zone, yes, you are going to have an additional step back on the upper floors for the residential portion.
On the upper floors?
Correct.
So it's 5 feet, but none on the, so is it a zero setback on the interior, on the ground level, if it's abutting residential?
Again, we're
5
talking,
minimum.
if you are looking at the land use chart on page 7, interior adjacent to residential zones, these setbacks are not changing. Okay? Except for the section where it talks about 1 foot minimum for every 2 feet of building height for an entire building, if a building is over 35, that's going to be simplified, okay? So these current setbacks are going to remain the same, with the exception if you have a multifamily residential or a mixed-use residential project, that residential portion is going to have an additional step back of, in this case, it shows an additional 10 feet on the third or above floors, which is very unique because it's only in the C3 zone that this is going to happen. This is not going to happen in the C1 or C2, at least not for projects by right.
Well, just to be clear, though, you're not talking about an additional setback. It would be an alternate setback.
We are looking for an additional setback.
But, yeah.
Okay.
Correct, and that is,
That's what, so my question is this. When we were doing the multifamily standards, there was a fork in the road. So there was a 6-foot setback scenario,
Average.
and then there was an average scenario. And so hypothetically, a commercial zone should be able to build more than a multifamily zone because it's more commercialized. And so in this case, it's actually going backwards, where a C3 zone, which is the most aggressive of the commercial zones, which should be allowed to build the most, is being penalized by a setback and then an additional setback on the upper levels. And so we're trying to figure out the logic there of how a commercial zone and a C3 zone is having more of an interior setback as it relates to multifamily development than what we've already discussed and kind of presented to council, and why is that happening?
and that's a fair comment, and staff is at this point in time, this is just for proposals for you, because this is going above and beyond in a C3 zone, okay? Right now, when we talk about the multifamily standards, we're also looking at 2 stories, and then you had an additional step back on the upper 3rd floor, okay? So you can either have, going back to the multifamily discussion, you can either have a 6-foot minimum or a 5-foot minimum, 8-foot average, and then you were having an additional step back on the 3rd floor, 10 feet. So in a way, this is I see your point, and that's up to you, whether the board wishes to do so, whether you'd like to maintain the existing setbacks the way they are right now, or whether you'd like to meet the same ones, because if you look at the development standards on page, by going back to page 7, so if for C1, the minimum is 5-foot minimum, 8-foot average, which is consistent with the MF zone or the multifamily districts. And then we're looking, we're proposing a 10-foot setback on the 3rd floor, which is the same as what is being proposed in the multifamily residential.
But is the same 6-foot fork in the road available for the multifamily, for this zone as well as it is for the multifamily?
No, because this is where we're basing it on the existing commercial setbacks adjacent to residential.
And if I may, back on page 20 again, if you look at number A, if at any point a building exceeds 45 feet in height, the residential floors at or above 45 feet shall be set back from the floor below a minimum of 10 feet for street-facing facades and 5 feet for facades facing interior property lines. This setback requirement shall not apply to properties located in the C3 Height District 3 zone. So there's already a exception built in for the densest portion of the C3 Height District 3. If that's something that DRB is interested in carrying through to some of these other standards, then we can certainly make that note in the ordinance.
Right.
Yeah, because, I mean, in the multifamily standards that we had all talked about, the entire block is multifamily. So every multifamily is adjacent to multifamily. And if in that scenario, we were okay, which we thought was going in the right direction, of having that fork in the road with the 6-foot minimum setback or the averaging, knowing that with AB 1287, the 100% density bonus, that state is saying we need to go by, and to eliminate the need for multiple waivers, which creates conflict with the neighborhood and everybody else. Now that we're doing something to be able to be prepared for that tsunami of waves coming around the corner, should be adaptable, at least to what is being proposed by the state and saying we need to be prepared for, versus going the other way. And so C3s should be much more liberally zoned to provide more buildable area than a C2 and vice versa. Again, than a C2 more than a C1. That's just the nature of the zoning. And so for us to be able to methodically think about this, I think that sliding scale should always be altered from our existing development standard. So whatever that standard is that we have today, that's what we got to kind of go with and alter it to be able to accommodate what's coming around the corner, which is AB 1287, 100% density bonus projects. And so in addition to that, the state is saying that we have to allow for waivers that would physically preclude a building from being built. And then in order to allow for that as well, we need to be creating scenarios that accommodate that. And so that's why I'm asking these questions. And I understand that page 20, that needs to be amended. But I guess since we've talked about this at this point in the junction, is that 6-foot minimum setback that is part of the multifamily standards should at least be brought in. And if it isn't, there should be some good reasons as to why it shouldn't be brought in, because those are all abutting multifamily. But for some reason, they're not. Okay. Okay, well, we could, I guess, talk about that.
Can I just seek additional clarification, because I want to make sure I'm understanding this. So if I'm looking at this, the top figure on page 21, right? And it is showing the 10-foot setback at the ground for this multifamily project or mixed-use project being built adjacent to a residentially zoned parcel. And then you're saying you're showing an additional 10 foot above the second story there. But if I'm hearing you correctly, and I may be mishearing you, but you're saying you want an additional 10 feet above what the C3 setback is in the adjacent to a residential. So shouldn't that image instead show like 17 foot instead of 10? Because if the standard for a C3 is a 7-foot minimum and average 10-foot for buildings and structures over 28 feet. So that is, the entire building is setback, not just the upper stories.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So whatever it would be applicable based on the whole height, you're adding an additional 10 feet for those above the third floor. Yes? Okay.
Correct. And again, this is
Okay.
something that the board, I think these are great comments. And if there's consensus, and I think that if there's discussion by the public as well, this is definitely, we can take your comments forward. So if you'd like to maintain the existing setbacks at the rear for commercial zones as listed on page 7.
Because it does seem to me that it is penalizing, you know, the mixed-use development, because if it was a commercial building being built, an office building, they wouldn't have to be set as far back, whereas if it's residential, it has to be further away. Kind of seems not logical to me, so. Okay,
That is the case.
okay.
So I think that, again, the concepts that were presented and that were depicted in the diagrams are ones that were put forward by our consultant. And so we're showing that here. There's been some modifications because, you know, staff is feeling that in a way, the existing setbacks, which are more liberal than what is currently proposed with the 10 and 10, depending on what zone you are located in and what height limit, that these particular ones as presented would be sort of a middle of the road. And if the board feels that maintaining the existing setbacks as they are in the zoning code is sufficient and that we don't want to penalize these projects that would otherwise be commercial buildings with these particular setbacks, would be the same for multifamily and mixed-use projects, then that is something that we can definitely support.
Yeah, it's interesting because when the Glenmark Hotel was built on Brand and Dryden, there was a multifamily project that was proposed on that commercial lot, but the setbacks were greater than what is built today as a hotel. And so there was a lot of pushback, and because the way the code was written, they ended up building the hotel because it was just easier for them to build a hotel, and they could build more of a hotel, more of a building, taller building, whereas then when they first tried to do a multifamily, it wasn't quite working. And so I guess if we're providing comments at this point in time as a junction, we felt, I think, that the multifamily zones, the way there was the setbacks as proposed in the multifamily zones in the R1250 certainly made sense. And at a minimum, those should be the setback standards at a minimum for C3 zone lots, I would say, not the other way around. Because, and the mindset is everything we've discussed to this point, because those multifamily standards already assume that everything next door is a multifamily. And so that would be, I think, going backwards for the C3 zones in regards to development, future development.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think it just defies logic to penalize a residential project adjacent to residential more so than a commercial project adjacent to residential. Now, the only exception I might say is that, maybe if it's single family, maybe this should be a different standard, but if it's adjacent to, multifamily residential, it just makes sense, So, it's an either-or scenario. If you're developing it as C3, you use C3. If you're developing it as, mixed-use multifamily, then the other standards would apply. But that's just, my thinking on it.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Just to speak to Board Member Simonian's point, I just want to also, as Board Member Simonian pointed out during the multifamily, the very long meeting that we had in that discussion, it goes into two different directions. You're either looking at a 5-foot minimum, 8-foot average, or you're looking at a 6-foot minimum, and that 6-foot minimum has additional horizontal and vertical modulation standards that would be an added set of standards onto this that we currently don't have. And so if you were to propose that those, the additional modulation standards for those straight, 6-foot setback in the multifamily would be very difficult to enforce here as part of a mixed-use or commercial project or multifamily residential project.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that that's exactly what we're proposing. I think we all agree that the mixed-use
Yes.
Zones are a different animal than the multifamily zones, and we need to treat them differently. But I'm just saying, in this particular case, the issue of the setback seems out of alignment with the real goal here, which is to allow more dense housing to be built on these commercial lots.
And we can definitely consider your feedback and move forward if you'd like to maintain the existing setbacks as they are.
Yeah, I think overall, what's being depicted on the screen there is, of course, a good idea to promote a pedestrian-oriented sidewalk. And so if the idea, and it's a good idea to promote that, then that's already taking away from buildable area in the front. And
Possibly.
Possibly, and but I would imagine 12 foot is really kind of the maximum, the majority of, we don't have a diagram, but I would think is most of the city, except the 18 feet is parts of Brand, et cetera, that are part of the DSP anyways, and so it does make sense not to penalize C3, C2 zones, or even the commercial zones in their entirety as it pertains to multifamily development, with more specifically the interior setback objectives that were presented with the multifamily objectives, for those to transfer themselves here. Now, how the undulation of facade and everything else comes into play, which is the second part of the discussion we could talk about as suggestions. But it seems as though that is a good idea, not to penalize the commercially zoned properties with their interior setbacks. Now, if it's abutting residential, single family, it's gonna be in its rear setback anyways. Not adjacent to it, it's gonna be its rear setback. And if it's in its rear setback, then we could have that worked into the rear setback if a commercially zoned property abuts a single family. Whereas in mid-block, the interior setbacks should be the same, as we're saying, but we could then talk about some other things later as they present themselves. So that's some feedback at this point.
Okay, let's keep moving. We've got a lot more to cover, so.
All right, and just to conclude with this slide, there is a proposal to reduce the amount of open space to be consistent with what is permitted in other in mixed-use zones such as the DSP, in Tropico, the IMUR zones, for urban context. And this would be a decrease from 200 square feet minimum of common open space and 40 square feet minimum of private open space to 140 square feet of open space, which can be provided in the form of private or common open space. Next, we have the massing and scale concepts that Teresa described would be the horizontal modulation and the vertical modulation. The horizontal modulation being the building break for longer building facades. The vertical modulation being the additional step backs on the upper floors. And as just discussed, the issue with the additional step backs at the rear as well. And we do propose for sloping sites that they're adjacent to multifamily into single-family residential zones, that sloping site be addressed as well. But we just do not have a diagram at this point in time. One was included, but needs to be worked on.
Sorry, a question
Yes.
about the modulation. Is it limited only to the street-facing facade, or when it's over 90, if it's interior, it's also?
Just to the street-facing
Just the
facade.
street, okay.
Correct. Just to the street-facing facade.
Oh, I see, this is street facing.
Yeah, but, and then you look at the sides, they're modulated, but if it's interior.
That is a depicted,
Yeah,
so,
yeah, I know.
again,
It's hard when you show me visuals.
yes, I know. And unfortunately, and that is the unfortunate thing, because these diagrams have been modified.
Yeah.
So but we will finalize the diagrams for the final draft as well.
Okay.
Next up would be the facade articulation, the menu options. Council directed staff to move forward with the menu options for the articulation of facade modulation. Does the DRB have any other recommendations? Do you like the brise soleil and the awning options as, as additions to this menu option? Do you have any other possible options that staff has not yet considered that you would like to include? This is up for feedback, or
You go
Chair
ahead.
Pro Temp, yeah, by the way, I thought the imagery that staff had provided was excellent. The examples that are being depicted for the language of the windows, the banding, the balconies, everything that you're describing, which is just so hard to depict, I thought your imagery was great. And I think that's, we could tell you've been working on it, because that just is really amazing. So, yeah, the soleil and the awnings, all are good features to allow, because they will be used creatively by architects. Just so we could kind of understand, though, I felt as though you were alluding to that these standards don't have undulation or articulation on the interior sides of a commercial development, and that's why it would be difficult to, and that's why the increased setbacks were being proposed. So am I understanding that correctly, that there is, let's say as depicted on page 19, that this undulation and articulation is really only for the street side, but as proposed here, the same wouldn't apply on the street sides, on the interior setbacks, not street side, on the interior setbacks, is that correct?
I apologize, I misspoke, because I'm looking at the code language now, and it says the following horizontal modulation standards shall apply to all facades. So yes, it would be applicable to all facades, so.
Okay, and so if it is all facades, then there would be articulation and undulation on all sides, so there is no danger of somebody just doing a blank facade on the interior side, right? As depicted here, that will not be allowed.
Correct, the project would have to have one of these menu options for a building segment,
Just like the multifamily did.
just like the multifamily, correct?
mean, seems to be in the right direction. That's what was discussed, so yeah. No change.
Continue. Last but not least, the articulation elements. So, now these were based on council's direction at the April meeting. The Fenestration Council directed staff to proceed with the fenestration options. I know that the DRB and the architects group sort of said, perhaps we don't need to regulate windows. You know, the building code regulates egress, ingress for bedroom windows and things, you know, of that nature. Council heard that and ultimately said, we would like to direct staff to, you know, that we are directed now to proceed with the menu options. We provided images and hopefully those were sufficient to show you that there is a variety. They're not going to be limited to single rectangular windows. And so there would be options in terms of shape. Roof forms, council heard you, the DRB and the architects group. The menu options regarding the pitched and flat roofs have been eliminated for roof line. And the only requirement would be so that long, elongated flat roofs, you know, over a certain length, which is yet to be determined, would have to be modulated so that you don't have just a long, flat, you know, 250-foot roof line.
Yeah, makes sense.
Materials, again, council directed staff to update the materials as suggested by the DRB and Architects Group. We're only going to limit, or I should say, regulate prohibited materials. However, based on quite a bit of discussion at council feels that EIFS should be prohibited on the ground floor and that on the upper floors of street-facing facades, it would be limited to 50% consistent with the DSP standard. And last but not least, council again heard the DRB and the architects group and said that is, you know, we understand we're not going to limit color because of the material choices, that there probably inherently will be changes in changes in material, changes in color, but that neon trim be limited, or I should say neon be limited to the trim only and not to a building elevation. So that concludes the presentation. I know that we have a number of callers in the queue, and I
have a question, though.
Yes, and
So as far as the common open spaces, and I know we're calling common open space something else now, but that's what I'm referring to, common open space.
open space.
One of the images illustrated 140 square feet, reduction to 140 square feet. There was a lot of discussion with the multifamily standards as to where that should be placed at. If it's going to be placed in the first 80% and whatnot. We had a lot of discussion about that with the architects group as well. Where is it being proposed to be placed here? Is there any restrictions on where it's going to be placed, or you could place it anywhere you want?
So the multifamily regulations were very different because there was a new concept being proposed of the common open space amenity area, the COSA, that was breaking up the building. And because of that, the open space was sort of regulated in regards to that COSA. In this case, because this is a very urban context, there are no limitations, whether it be a balcony, whether it be a rooftop deck. This is a streetscapes, urban context, and it would be consistent with other mixed-use residential projects.
So it could be 140 per unit, let's say on the deck, on the roof deck, or it could be 140 square feet of private balcony, let's say per unit. Just depends on.
Correct, and so it would allow the maximum flexibility for the architect in terms of its open space. The only thing is there are regulations regarding balconies, and so the balconies themselves, if they're used as a facade articulation option, that's one of the options, on the menu list. Those have certain regulations in terms of it has to be, a portion of it has to be recessed, there's a maximum projection. So there are minor regulations regarding balconies for private open space, but otherwise there is no limitation in terms of, where is it located on a lot? Where is it located on a building facade? Or-
That's definitely in the right direction. In regards to COSA with the multifamily standards, what was council's feedback on that, or where did COSA end up? Do you recall on if it was eliminated to be kind of placed anywhere?
So COSA was actually, I would have to bring up I
You know
believe I
what,
read
that's
it.
outside the preview
recall,
of today's discussion. We
Yeah.
could talk about that later, yeah.
It
Yeah.
was not significantly amended, except that lots that are larger than 90 feet in width could potentially split the COSA into two areas with a rooftop deck and a ground floor COSA, but the minimum dimensions were going to be maintained.
Okay, thank you.
And just before, we do have 2 slides, so I just don't want to forget them at the very end, but we have 2 community meetings regarding the multifamily and the mixed-use ordinances. We have an in-person meeting scheduled for Wednesday, May the 22nd. This is in person at the Spar Heights Community Center, starting at, doors open at 6:45, and the presentation promptly begins at 7 p.m. And we have a virtual online presentation the following week on Wednesday, and so that way people can join from the comfort of their living rooms for a very essentially the same type of presentation, and to 2 additional opportunities to provide feedback from the public. So.
Okay, very good. Well, let's open up public commentary here. Mr. Durham has been very patiently waiting, so I'll invite him to come up and give his comments.
Would it be all right if you take the callers first?
Yeah, sure, if you don't.
Okay. First caller, Jacob Pierce. Jacob Pierce, you're live on the air with the Design Review Board, and thank you for your patience since you've been on hold now for over an hour. Great. No patient. Yeah, 'cause it had, okay. I believe we'll try that. Jacob Pierce, you're live on the air
Yes.
with the Design
Thank
Review
you.
Board.
I wanted to, first of all, thank the planning staff for their hard work on this item. And given, the state of the housing shortage and this housing crisis that we're in, I laud the reduction in the open space requirements. I think that given the unhoused people on the street and homelessness in our community, that there is and just the RHNA requirements that the city of Glendale has to meet, and the great parks already available in the city of Glendale. I think allowing more flexibility in terms of open space is a really great step. And I also wanted to just simplify and reduce setback requirements for multifamily, no matter what zone they're in. And other than that, just wanted to say that I think objective design standards are a really exciting opportunity to, make our housing processes more predictable, provide more certainty, and make sure that Glendale continues to look like a beautiful community. But at the same time, want to make sure that the Design Review Board is providing some flexibility so that these buildings in the future of Glendale can take a variety of forms and a variety of styles. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Kirsten Blad, you're live on the air with the Design Review Board.
Yeah, hi, my name's Kirsten Blott. I'm a Glendale resident, and yeah, thank you for everyone's work on this, the staff, and thank you for consulting architects. I know sometimes these objective design standards just end up not making that much sense architecturally, but it seems like everyone has put a lot of thought into this. And yeah, I'm very excited to see that the city is taking our housing crisis seriously and encouraging, hopefully, more housing development. I think especially Glendale Avenue, where these standards will apply, there's very little housing there, and I think having more housing or mixed use could help even the existing businesses, and yeah, when I walk down Glendale Avenue, I think about it feels really kind of bleak. Everything has a big parking lot out front, and really the best part of Glendale Avenue is the building that is historic and kind of predates a lot of our current zoning, and has like no setbacks and is very tall and mixed use, has a cool coffee shop on the bottom, and I hope these objective design standards are a step towards bringing that sort of building style back to Glendale Avenue. I think the only thing I heard that I questioned were the possible, I heard step back requirements, and I think those always seem a little unnecessary and just reduce the number of units you can have and really limit what you can do in terms of the architectural style. But overall, yeah, I applaud this effort and very supportive. Thank you.
Thank you. I do not see any other callers. It appears that one caller dropped off, so.
Mr. Durham, you're welcome to come up.
Chair Pro Tem Welch, other members of the board, thank you for letting me speak. I'm Alan Durham. I attended the most recent city council meeting. I guess it was back in April. One of my comments at that meeting was about our urban planning and architectural consultant, Crandall and Arambula. From what I determined, they're located in Portland. But my comment to the council is, where are our consultants? The city always hires these consultants, but in my experience from dog parks to pension obligation bonds, the consultants have been doing the presentations in conjunction with the city staff. But I've never seen anyone from Crandall and Arambula, even though they may be behind these proposals, but I've never seen them at a meeting, and it seems strange to me. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but they seem to be being kept under wraps, not available for questions, not making presentations. Pasadena has hired, I'm going to probably massacre their name, but I'm looking for it here. Mul Polizaitis. And of course, they're located in Pasadena, although they're nationally recognized urban planners. They've opened their meetings to the public from the beginning, whether they're with architects. They've had a walking tour open to the public. It seems like Pasadena is doing much better outreach, although maybe we're catching up. But in reaction to my comments at council, it was stated that Crandall Arambula's contract with the city ended in December 2023. Now, maybe that's changed, but that was the last statement I heard about our consultant, although now I'm hearing that they're still involved. So I'm really confused about that and would like clarification, because I think our consultant should be involved until this comes to an end. They can't drop out in the middle of it. The city should extend the contract if necessary. I totally support the city council's desire for 12-foot setbacks from the curb. They were very adamant about that. I think it's important for the streetscape. I'm not particularly in favor of allowing 2 feet cantilevered. I think that doesn't, provide for really good setbacks in streetscapes. And the articulation modulation, I think it's like you only need one, and it could be awnings. I don't think awnings, I mean, it's fine if you want to add them, but I don't think that should be just a single articulation, or banding. I just think that you need multiple articulation rather than single articulations. And I don't think what's being proposed is necessarily going to give us great-looking buildings. Thank you.
Thank you. Does Steph want to comment at all about the issue of the consultant, or?
Yes. Chair Pro Tem, board members, Crandall Arambula was retained. Their contract did end in December. They had promised to update the images as needed. They are reviewing our comments. They are not on retainer to come back. Unfortunately, this was a grant by the state, the SB2 grant that funded this work on both the multifamily and the multifamily residential mixed-use projects. So they have been working on both of these projects. They provided the material. Unfortunately, we're at that juncture where this went prolonged. The Pasadena is a very different project. I'm not going to be able to speak to them because their meetings are with public outreach, and it's a different project, different funding sources, different community. And so right now we are doing our best effort because we actually needed to provide documentation on which to be able to provide comment on. And so, they will not be at any of the public hearings, unfortunately, because their contract has ended, but we will be able to have the diagrams updated to address what the final draft standards will be.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, for my part, I think consultants are used excessively, and I think we live here. It's our city. We ultimately need to be the ones who help guide this. So I'm more pleased that we don't have them, to be perfectly honest, in my opinion.
Thank you. And hopefully we're doing a good enough job
You
also
are
to be
doing a
able to
great job,
explain
yes.
this on behalf of, consultants. So.
Okay, so who wants to
Starting?
start off?
I'll start, and I'll probably keep it short. I agree with everything that was stated about the setbacks. I think we should not be more stringent when it comes to the commercial zones. I like that we're paying attention to the pedestrian experience, so I really appreciate that 12-foot minimum setback. And I kind of agree with Mr. Durham about the second level, bringing it out to 10 feet. I could do without that. I think keep it, a nicer experience on the street is good. Flexibility of the open space, I'm for, and that was it. I like that. Hopefully this is gonna get us to a place where we are gonna reduce the amount of variances. Oh, the FAR, lot coverage and height. Eliminate 1.2. I could be for that for commercial zones. Eliminate 50% max. I could also be for that, but I think maybe not just entirely. Maybe we set a different kind of limitation. And then for the height, I think corresponding to existing commercial height limit is a good way to go. Those are my
Perhaps,
thoughts.
if you don't mind, it's up to the board, but perhaps we can obtain feedback on these development standards before we continue. Or would you prefer to do it
From us?
individually? Yes.
From us?
So that we hear consensus from the group?
Oh, okay, sure. These are residue of the 1250, right? So, I mean, I think that's removing the FAR, I think makes sense. Having an FAR requirement in varying commercial zones when you're going to have potentially very different design opportunities, heights, everything. It doesn't make any sense. I'm also fine with eliminating the lot coverage standard. I think that, again, we're talking about commercial zones. We're talking about the most urban-oriented places. This is where we want housing built. We want to maximize these development sites because we want to protect single-family neighborhoods. So the best way to do that is to increase the density where it makes the most sense in these urban settings. So I think everything that we can do to facilitate bring that density to where it is best supported with transit, best supported with services, I think that makes the most sense. So I'm also in line with the height standard too.
I totally concur. I feel as though with our commercially zoned parcels, they should not be penalized. Oh, sorry about that. I concur as well, 100%. I feel as though our commercially zoned parcels should not be penalized when it comes to multifamily standards, especially since the multifamily standards are so fresh in our minds because they were discussed 2 months ago. As an overarching statement, I would say, and I think this board agrees in that commercially zoned properties should not be penalized with any development standard beyond what was stated in the multifamily standards. So that's a pretty good starting point. In regards to what's being depicted at the moment, absolutely, elimination of FAR makes sense for these zones. Increasing the lot coverage or eliminating it, absolutely, I'd be up for eliminating it. And the height also makes sense because the C1 zone is limited to 25 feet. And so in the multifamily zones, we said everything should be increased to 3 stories minimum, knowing that a concession would get us to a 4-story if they are doing a density bonus project. And so I feel as though that needs to be increased. The C1 height limit should at least be increased to match what's right now in the C2 zone or something. So then that shouldn't trigger a concession or a waiver of some sort, because if we say 3 stories are allowed, we at the same time need to make sure that height is adjusted too, just so we're not creating any ambiguity, because you can't have a 3-story, 25-foot building. It's just not possible. So that should be hand in hand. As I stated earlier, I think it's a great idea to have the front setback be measured from the face of curb, 12 feet. And I remember we had this discussion in the Tropico discussion when that master plan was being, or that general plan, or that plan was being discussed. And it's interesting how we had the compatibility of prevailing setback discussion earlier this evening. And so, and I'm wondering if we could give some feedback, because what I'm afraid of happening is if we have a new development that now has an increased setback of 12 feet, are we creating an urban setting which would promote unlawful sleeping at nights? And so let's just be frank, that was an issue that was discussed at Tropico, where the same kind of an common open space, et cetera, was being proposed in the front setback, and we had some comments. Because at the end of the day, especially if there's a 2-foot setback, cantilever above it, it's protected from the rain, it's protected from the elements. It's in an urban setting. We're trying to promote, pedestrian walkways, and if you have 90% of the block or 95% of the block still undeveloped or not improved, in that it's developed with old standards and old buildings, all of a sudden you have a new development that's 100 feet wide and it's all set in. It's a perfect place to camp out at night. And how do you then enforce that? And if it is a public easement, it becomes a by right public area. And then all of a sudden we start creating these things. So we had that discussion, and I feel as though there were some items that were integrated, such as raised planters, such as other things, which kind of eliminated a flat kind of protected area for midnight sleeping, let's just say. So I think that should be thought of as well somehow. Mr. Matitas?
No, thank you, Mr. Simonian. Actually, we do require, as part of the ordinance, planners are going to be required in front of any residential, I apologize, my microphone isn't on. Just to begin again, Mr. Simonian, in speaking to your point, raised planters are going to be required for any area abutting a residential occupiable floor area on the ground floor that is not a doorway. However, the intention was to allow for at grade a larger space in front of perhaps for outdoor dining. And I think that was a comment that was made during Tropico. You know, if you have wider sidewalks, you can have outdoor dining, you can have congregations. So it really depends on what the priorities are. I see your point, in terms of.
Well, we want both, right? We
Exactly.
want to have the outdoor dining, but we also want to create a safe environment where people are walking at 12:30 at night and they feel safe. So these are planning issues that have been around for many, many, many decades, and they could be addressed. But they should be, that should be inserted in there as a form of protection where whatever staff feels is necessary to do that. In regards to the overall standards, I think we had really dove in a lot more detail on the multifamily standards, but some of which we kind of flew by and then we focused in on were the additional setbacks. And again, I completely concur with my board members. This is where we want density. This is where we want things to be built, especially multifamily. And I feel as though we're amending these objectives because there were a lot of difficulties with developing multifamily in commercial zones because they had to have a commercial component on the ground level, which this is eliminating, which is going in the right direction. But at the same time, we should be making sure that every single one of these standards, that objective standards that are being set with the development standards, don't restrict commercial zone properties in any which way compared to multifamily. And if we have that as an overarching suggestion for staff and council to consider, then it's probably going in the right direction from this board's point of view. Now, if there's other reasons to consider, that there's always something, but in general, this is where density should be placed. And there should be some sort of a hierarchy between them, between a C1, a C2, and a C3. Now, that's not being proposed, but there almost has to be, just for something staff to consider. If we are trying to incentivize development to occur in certain commercially zoned areas, then we would much rather it occur in a C3 than a C1, right? Because if they're going to have that density and that height and et cetera, we'd rather have it in a C3 than a C1. And so it would make sense for there to be some sort of a sliding scale of some sort when it comes to development standards, where at a minimum they're multifamily and then they start working backwards, whatever that may be. But that would be a comment that I would bring forward, just so there is some sliding scale, and whatever that may be, density, height, setbacks, et cetera, those should be considered. Besides that, though, I feel as though the graphics were very well presented, very well thought out, and I think we're in the right direction with some of these tweaks.
Thank you, Mr. Simonian. If we could just go through the slides, just so that we make sure that we're touching on all of the items that we need to address. And I'm not sure if I'm hearing the consensus with regards to the 12-foot setback. and the 10-foot setback up for the upper floors. I'm hearing, at least from what I heard from Mr. Welch and Board Member Chagayan, that yes, you think that in this urban environment, a 12-foot setback is appropriate, but I'm not hearing that from Board Member Simonian, or at least for the
No.
street side?
Yeah,
For the,
I
so
said I think it's a good idea, and.
you think it's a good idea, but you don't want to,
Well, I don't
and
wanna
forgive me, I
create-
mean, I'm hearing it that you want to make sure that you're not removing any potential development from, whether it be a commercial or residential. So I just want to clarify that. So is the board unanimous in your 12-foot build, from curve face to build-to line, and a 10-foot for the upper floors?
I am fine with it, because I think the 12-foot, again, we have to pay attention to that pedestrian environment. The whole, the complete streets concept, the pedestrian has equal weight, and I think that having wider sidewalks is appropriate. The 10-foot, I think, is appropriate. I mean, whether people use that as part of the articulation of the facade, or they opt not to do that for reasons of construction efficiency and just keep it at 12-foot, but giving them the option of going to the 10, I think is fine, or maybe potentially using that as part of having extended bays. You can't put the bays out above the sidewalk, but you could put bays that would go into that space. So I think that just makes sense.
I agree. My comments were entirely based on ways that we could add language in addition to what you have here that would eliminate or would create hardships for people to sleep in those areas for safety reasons.
Okay.
That was really what I was alluding to. I think it's a good idea to make that 10-foot an option on the second floor. If someone chooses not to use it, they could not use it. Because it does add structural complexity to it, but at the same time, they might decide to put their balconies there and have it cantilever out, and so far as it's recessed, then it might work for them. So it would be a good idea to keep it an option.
I agree.
Great, perfect, okay, consensus. Moving on, open space. Agreement to reduce to 140 square feet to be consistent with other multifamily, or I should say, other mixed-use zones?
Yes.
Correct. Horizontal modulation with a break for elongated facades? Yes? Great.
Yes.
Neighborhood transitions, what I'm hearing, or at least based on your discussion, you do not want to have any changes to what the existing setbacks are in commercial zones.
Well, no, I think we're going beyond that, because the existing commercial zone interior setbacks are more restrictive than the multifamily standard objectives that were presented. So the multifamily incentives that, objectives that were presented had a minimum of 6 feet, right? As an option.
Okay, so the multifamily had a minimum of 6 or a minimum of 5 and 8.
So
And if,
let's stop right there. These are more than that, is what I'm saying, on existing. So if you're asking for our opinion, I think what we're saying is the interior setbacks should be should at least match what we had talked about on the multifamily side. Now, whatever that is, whatever that ends up being, there should not be more restrictions placed on commercial zone properties in regards to interior setbacks with these new objectives.
Yeah, because it looks like it's a more of a setback because of the height of the building, right, in that zone?
so it depends on whether it's adjacent to residential or adjacent to mixed, or adjacent to commercial.
Right, but adjacent to residential, I think is what Mr. Simonia is saying. Adjacent to residential is a larger setback than in a multifamily zone where, again, that's residential, right?
So right now, the multifamily residential project has 2 vanes. You're either looking at a 5-foot minimum, 8-foot average, or a 6-foot minimum with additional modulation for both vertical and horizontal. They also have a COSA to address the building mass. In this urban context, when it comes to interior setbacks adjacent to non-residential zones, certain zones had no setback whatsoever. So for a commercial building, you know, you're looking at an air-conditioned space with inoperable windows, you know, different construction types than you would be for residential. And there is a proposal to have a 5-foot minimum upper floor setback for residential.
So the page 7 requirements that we're looking at are for commercial only?
Yes.
These are commercial only.
Okay.
Correct.
And then it would change to, I guess that's where the
No,
confusion
I think it wouldn't
is.
change. It would be, there would be additional setbacks in the original, in
And
the,
it- what we're hearing right now, the board does not wish to have any additional setbacks. It
Right.
would be these setbacks right here that you see on the page 7.
But then, okay, so on page 7 for a C3 zone, 7-foot minimum and average 10-foot for buildings and structures over 28 feet and up to 35. 15-foot minimum, 20-foot average if building is over 35 feet.
So we can amend that. Now, this was,
Which is more restrictive than the 6-foot minimum or 5-foot minimum and 8-foot average.
Yeah.
correct, but these setbacks were specifically designed when this was written in order to ensure that when you are adjacent to a residential zone, the step back or the setback increases as the building height increases. That was why these were created in such a way where if you have a shorter building that's up to 28 feet, you have only a 5-foot minimum, 8-foot average. If you have a building that is between 28 feet and 35 feet, a 3-story, you have a 7-foot minimum, 10-foot average. And at the time, if you have a building over 35 feet, for instance, you have a building that's 60 feet. So a 1-foot setback for every 2 feet of building height, and if it's a building that's 6 feet, you'd have a setback of 30 feet according to today's code. And what staff was proposing, instead of a setback of 30 feet adjacent to an interior property line, that there would be a 15-foot minimum and a 20-foot average, which is actually less than what code requires today.
And I think if we're trying to promote, I think what we're saying is if we want to promote development in a commercial zone, if that restriction is there, why would anybody come and develop in a commercial zone? They would just go and develop in a multifamily zone. And then we wouldn't have development occurring in a commercial zoned area, which is where we're trying to promote density.
Is there multifamily over 35 feet, multifamily zone over 35 feet setback? What is the setback requirement over 35 feet for a multifamily zone?
So over 35 feet,
It's still 6 feet. I think that's
The proposed,
Right,
yes,
yes.
would have that same
So I think that's
setback.
what
Right.
we're saying here.
and I
is-
understand that, and I think it's just, if the board wishes to see, I think that we would have to look into this, because the thing is also you're limited to 43 units to the acre, okay? So if you're going to have a building that's 60 feet, 60 feet height with no FAR limit, with this density of 43 units to the acre, that is still going to be your governing development standard. So you have to take that into account, because in terms of, again, these standards, and I'm just going to repeat, these standards were to address compatibility within a context that's directly adjacent to a multifamily. So I see your point, Board Member Simon. With all due respect, I completely see your point.
Not just
and I
my
see-
point, it's everyone's
And I
point.
see everyone's point, and that you want to make sure that this is for the maximum development. And so we can definitely take a look into that. And I'm just trying to show where the code standards were written into place, where that, in terms of a neighborhood context, adjacent, the commercial building itself would be limited. So in a way, you're penalized, the commercial building itself would have a greater step back. The residential would be a closer step back, and again, they have every ability as a density bonus project, because you are a most likely going to go above 8 units, have an inclusionary housing requirement, have a density bonus provision. And I understand your concern. You don't want to have additional concessions and waivers, but you're also having a building that's much taller and that's that much closer to residential uses at the rear. So there is already an incentive ingrained, because right now we're reducing all of these other barriers to residential and mixed-use development. So, but we can definitely take that into account and present it as well, so.
And perhaps it's a simplification where, instead of, we have all of these different criteria for 28 to 35 and then above 35, maybe there's a different height limit that could be looked at for an increased setback, considering that some of the height limits in the commercial zones do allow up to 90 feet, or, if a density bonus project came along more than that, there may be a little additional buffer that would be appreciated by residentially zoned properties next
Right.
door.
So, but I think you get the gist of where we're driving
I
here. Is that,
understand. Yeah,
okay, so
Absolutely.
personally, I was thinking it's an either-or situation, They can, if they're developing a multifamily within a commercial zone, they could either continue to use the commercial standards, or they could use the residential standards. And if there's a way that you can allow them to choose, I'm not sure whether that's, creates, other conflicts, but
Like, in other words, if they're gonna develop commercial, they stay with the as-is development.
stay with the
standard.
as-is. But if they're gonna opt to do a mixed use, then they could either stick with the commercial ones, or they could use the multifamily standards.
And that would involve the common open space amenity area and the additional modulation both in terms of vertical and horizontal standards.
I don't know if it has to bring all of that in there, but maybe, yeah. I mean, it's something to study.
Because in a sense, the commercial standards were developed, and they've worked well over the years, for commercial development. I mean, these commercial development standards apply to the car dealerships. They apply to, large, massive commercial properties that or buildings that are being built right now by tech industry and also by the film industry, et cetera. So that is going to continue occurring. Those car dealerships will continue doing what they're doing, and they're going to go down the commercial standards. They're going to use the commercial standards of our development standards. However, if somebody comes in and says, I would like to do a multifamily project, whether it's mixed use or multifamily 100%, in a residential, in a commercial zone, then perhaps these objectives kick in. And if staff and council and everybody feel as though those development standards, those objective standards for interior setbacks should be the same for the multifamily zones as the commercial zones, relating to setbacks, et cetera, then that's what they would go down. But that would be a way to kind of preserve the development standards for the commercial, future commercial developments, but at the same time provide flexibility and incentive for buildings.
Yeah, basically, I think the bottom line here is that we want to make sure that anyone who's developing a multifamily or a mixed use in a commercial zone gets to develop it at least to the level of what would be otherwise allowed in a multifamily zone. So any restriction that limits that or tightens that or makes it more difficult is the opposite of what we're trying to accomplish, right? Right, okay.
Going on to facade articulation, menu options,
Yep, fine,
fine?
yeah.
Yes.
Any feedback regarding the, on the screen, regarding the, I'm not sure, if GTV6s? So,
Architectural elements.
architectural elements regarding fenestration options, roof forms, materials.
No, I think it's
Colors.
fine. I'm glad to see curtain wall being treated, given equal treatment here, you know.
Okay. That is it. Any other additional comments? Because yes.
I do. I know we're getting late here, but
No, please.
I want to revisit one of the things that I brought up before, which
Yes.
was, again, an issue of, you know, having all of these objective standards that allow people to do different things, but there's nothing in any of this that says it should be a quality design, a holistic design. That is still open territory here, and anyone could come in and put a bunch of mishmash things together and call it a design, and as long as it checks all the boxes, we don't have any purview to say no, right? So is there anything that we can do?
And again, thank you, Board Member Welch. That is the question that you raised during DRB. We raised that during the architects group, and that was actually its own separate slide during the council presentation. And that is something that we as staff would strive to have, a holistically designed, well-articulated, high-quality project, you know, as required by the objective design standards. To date, based on conversations with all various groups and also with our, you know, consultant and whatnot, and with other cities, we have yet to come up with measurable, verifiable, objective design standards on how we would be able to require such a holistic design. If the board has any comments, we would love to have those, because unfortunately, we have not been able to actually come up with, again, with these objective design standards. And there was a lot of discussion at the at the meeting with the architects group, same thing. We mentioned this to city council, you know, again, there was, you know, this is,
Unanimity of opinion that it's desirable, but how do you do it?
and how do you do it? With objective, measurable, verifiable standards.
Well, so one thing occurs to me is that, I mean, any design professional, if they're architectural historian or whoever, if you were to query them about, okay, what are the elements of a design language, okay? If you're talking about a Spanish colonial, if you're talking about an international style, modern, craftsman style, any one of us could come up with a list of things that say, these are the things that define that style, okay? So let's just call it international style, okay? Rectilinear design, deep overhangs, large glazing areas. You can come up with a number of different things that anyone could come up with and say, this is what defines the international style. Why can't we be able to say that, have a standard that says the design should be consistent, have a consistent design language, and this is how you validate it, by counting up whether they're including enough of those elements in the design, and also not including things that are not part of the design, or limiting the amount of things that they can have that is not a contributing element to that design style. So if you could put a number on it, 4 contributing elements and no more than 1 or 2 non-contributing elements must be done as part of evaluating that design language. Is that not objective? I mean, defining what those elements are might be considered subjective, but I don't think so. As you know, I mean, you guys tell me if you disagree.
So I would add one more level of interesting dialogue, layer of detail to this dialogue. So we've had so many instances over the years where, let's say, a craftsman house comes forward, and the columns are just a little too thin, right? The stone veneer at the bottom is just a little bit too high. the proportionality of the windows are not.
Today's Spanish.
That's right. It's not quite there. Or like today, they actually had the corbels in the right scale, but let's say the corbels are just a little too far off. They're too far spread apart where you would say, well, no, those can't be real structural members, or they're just too thin or too. So there is this trained thought process as architects of what is appropriate scale, size, material, etc., right? And it goes back to the beginnings of your training and also form follows function, where you can't just, let's say, have a stone veneer on top of a building, it's gonna fall off, right? So that's why stone is always placed at the base, right? So those things. And so it would be even that much more difficult now, once you have those numbers sorted out, let's say, for your example, of now talking about the actual scale of them, the slenderness of them, the thickness of them. It is something that we've take for granted, where we say, we'd make that a little thicker, make that a little thinner, move this over, get the window language to be consistent, meaning proportional. But those are going to be very difficult to prescribe.
Articulate.
Yeah, and we should have more
Objective.
discussions on this, not just tonight, of how that could occur, because we'll all sleep on it and come up with some ideas. But it is something that's the next frontier, which AI will come into this, and there will be people that do this with artificial intelligence, and they will just spew it out and come in and say, not only that, it meets building code. It should go through fairly quickly because everything is worked out to the latest UBC standards, et cetera, building code. So something to think about of how it's going to transform everything.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I'm just pushing for that we
Dialogue.
strive to come up with something, because I don't think any of us wants mishmash designs that have no real design language to them, that are not consistently good-looking, that's basically check all the boxes, but looks like a pile of crap, Nobody wants that. So having something that gives us some way to do that is just all I'm begging for us to try and figure out a way to do. That's all. Okay.
So do we
All right.
move to adjourn at this point?
I think unless staff has any more requests from us, I think I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
No, thank you very much for.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
really do appreciate your feedback and your expertise, and we will provide your comments to the planning commission as it moves forward, so.
The graphics are perfect.
Yeah.
Come a long way, yeah.
Now, so. All right, but thank you.
Thank you very
again.
much.
Thank you.
And so
Thank you very
there's
much.
adjournment at 8 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.